So I wrote this verse to show you how I feel about true servant leadership. The road is long, the pain is deep, but into greatness you can creep. But strive for gain and push for power, and this will fail you in your final hour. So strive and struggle to help your brother, to serve and bow for one another. For I may not understand this advice you always give, but I can always follow clearly how you serve and how you give. So there I was, my first experience with service and leadership. It was 2003, and I was living in a $12 a month tin shack in a town called Los Blancos in the Dominican Republic near the Haitian border. I had lost 40 pounds to amoebic dysentery, had bone break fever. I felt like a failure as a leader and as a Peace Corps volunteer. I would get so sick and frail and weak that I would think for one moment about giving up on my own life. The community I had come to rescue would now have to rescue me. In la unión tenemos la fuerza. In union, we have strength. I would seek to unite the Dominican and Haitian farmers together to form a coffee business so that they can make more income for their community, for their family, and for their children. I would ride my government-issued horse around the mountains with a machete on my hip, convincing the farmers to come to my meetings. I think a lot of the farmers thought, what the heck does this 20-year-old gringo know about growing coffee? And the answer at the time was, not a whole lot. But I continued to ask. I held 3 meetings, and not many people showed. So I did what the Peace Corps taught me to do. I just started to serve them. I went up the mountains each day and worked with them, in the fields, in the mountains, but I couldn't keep up. I didn't take care of myself. And ultimately, I would get sick and reach a new low. Later on, I would sit under a large mango tree at a coffee meeting, and this time people did show up. 200 people showed up. 300 members later, they had planted 2 million coffee trees in the mountains of Los Blancos. They had built roads together, schools together, community centers together. They had built their lives together. But it wasn't until they recognized that I was willing to sacrifice at the level of my own health that they would trust me. I didn't mean to get sick. It wasn't my intention. But I was passionate. I really cared about them. And when they recognized that I was willing to sacrifice and give, and I cared, only then would they follow. And we could build something great together. And that's what we did. And I would follow the example of my grandfather before me. Society told me not to serve. They said, Edward, 2.5 years of your life, bro, in the Peace Corps? Don't you want to get a job, make some money? You're not going to make any money doing that, man. 2.5 years in some foreign country wasted. You're not going to have any skills. You're going to fall behind in the job market. What are you doing? I knew in my heart they were wrong. I knew that service would make me better. Service would break me. It would humble me. It would mold me. And at times it would bring me to my knees. But I never felt so connected to people. And that what I was doing truly mattered. And I would learn a valuable lesson in the Peace Corps. That no one would ever be poor by serving and by giving. And I would follow the lesson of my grandfather before me. So my grandfather was an Austrian Jew in Europe during World War II. His name was Robert Popper. Granddaddy knew that the Nazis were coming. And he'd applied to the U.S. military twice to fight the Nazis against the greater good, against the greater evil. And he would be rejected because he was Austrian. But he wouldn't give up. The Nazis would come to his parents' house, my great-grandparents, would assault them and dump them in the Inn River. Still, others of his family would be killed in the brutal Nazi concentration camps. And others would commit suicide, some whole families, rather than face the harsh brutality of the Nazis. I can't help but thinking that my granddaddy's servant heart, in some way, that God was watching over him. because he escaped. In 1938, before the horrors of Crystal Night, my granddad and his little brother escaped to Ellis Island, to this country, to a world called America, a country he would grow to love his home. He would become a U.S. citizen, and he would ultimately join the Army after all. Not in time to become a warrior, but in time to become a healer. See, my granddaddy became a doctor, and he would touch thousands of lives through his practice, ultimately serving for over 35 years at the VA hospital in Memphis, Tennessee, where he would serve many of the same veterans who fought to liberate his people from the Nazis. He could have been angry and bitter, and he had that in his heart. But he would ultimately forgive Hitler, and would take the anger and resentment in his heart and would replace it with a heart for service. You see, because real leaders don't hold a grudge. Real leaders seek to make a difference, and that's what Granddaddy did. Granddaddy had lost everything, his family, his country, his way of life, his dignity. But he would never lose, not once, the courage to serve in his heart. And he would pass courage to serve on to me. And it's my hope to pass the courage to serve on to you. So fast forward to 2011. I'd started a life with my wife, Mary, and we had started a family together. I was working for Goldman Sachs at the time when I would get a call that would forever change my life. Two friends of mine from Shreveport, Louisiana, had gone to the Navy together, had served together, done multiple deployments together. I would get a call. They had been in a helicopter, and it had been shot down. The mission was Extortion 17 over Wardock Province in 2011, and they would both be killed. I would find myself in that memorial service, and something would hit me in the chest like a pound of bricks. Edward, what are you living for, man? Wealth, status, accomplishment? People are dying. They're doing multiple deployments. What are you doing to help? What would your grandfather do? I recognized in that moment that I needed to be part of the solution in Afghanistan, and that I too would serve. I spoke to my wife, Mary, and told her what I intended to do, and she understood. She supported me 100%. I would leave my wife, Mary, my 2-year-old daughter, Caroline, and my son, Edward, who was only 6 days old. And I'll never forget being inspired, but also devastated when Mary would say, Edward, don't worry. I'll always have little baby Edward to take care of me if you never make it back. And I will always bring a part of you with me through him. I would go on to serve with a team who was fighting violently and valiantly to help the Afghans and enlist them in their own defense against the Taliban. We would have some close calls in the summer of 2012, and the Navy would give us an opportunity to make videos in case we didn't make it back for our families to have. I'll never forget looking in the lens that day for my 2-year-old little Caroline, my son Edward, who I hardly knew. Caroline, Edward, if you're watching this video, your daddy did make it back, and I'm terribly sorry. But I want you to know that I served our God and our country and fought for your freedom. And I believe that this country and our God is worth fighting for and worth dying for. Your mommy and I brought you into this world to serve others and be a light for this world. And I hope that you will serve. I hope that you will love. And I hope that you will take care of your mommy in every way you can. I love you, and I hope you understand. Later that fall, we would suffer tough losses on the battlefield. And I would lose a friend to an insider attack. The Taliban had done these insider attacks to drive a wedge between us and our Afghan partners, to create a house divided and have our mission fail. Many of us were worried that if we invited the Afghan partners to this memorial service, that there would be another insider attack and that we would get shot by our own men. But it was a risk we were willing to take, and we had them. That day, we honored the lives of a Roman Catholic Army soldier, a Jewish Navy SEAL, and a Muslim American Marine and current Army sergeant and friend. These men gave their life for this country, for each other, for something greater than themselves, despite religion. And we showed the Afghans that day what America looks like. As I walked away from the podium that day, eulogizing our brother in arms, I would realize that something had shifted for all of us. The Afghans had realized that these men had died for our country, despite religion, and for them, and that we had invited them to the memorial service, even with the risk. And the Afghans would have our backs on the battlefield from that day on. Only weeks later, we would suffer another terrible loss. We would lose our commander. The mission seemed bleaker than ever, and many of us didn't know what to do. But that day, instead of being angry and bitter or hopeless, we committed to serve one another and continue the mission for each other and to honor him. We would lose an incredible man that day, an incredible leader, commander, warrior, and friend. But we would never lose the mission. You see, this is what America is all about: serving one another and fighting for each other. Sacrificing for one another is what makes America truly great and will always be what makes America great again. So I'd come back to the U.S. with the intention of using these lessons in my daily life and my business. I would rejoin Goldman Sachs and help them to recruit more veterans to the firm by running the Veterans Group. I would graduate from MIT, and I would learn a tremendous amount about leadership and business. I would meet some of the wealthiest, most successful and powerful people in the world. But I'm standing here right now telling you that what I learned at these fine institutions pales in comparison to what I learned from some of the most humble and meek people in the world. The Haitian and Dominican farmers through the Peace Corps, the homeless in post-Katrina New Orleans through Tulane, and the Afghan tribes through the military. And I came back and have started a business that seeks to inspire and guide other servant leaders to create radical change in their businesses. It is this purpose-driven approach where we will create mission and margin in equal regard to truly build businesses of significance. And the one thing that's in common for all of the leaders that we support is they all have the courage to serve. And I am dedicated to serving them and helping them make an impact. So many of us have heard about servant leadership through the lens of Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, or Nelson Mandela, but very seldom do you hear about servant leadership through the corporate world. I'd like to tell you a story about Cheryl Batchelder. Popeyes Fried Chicken, the business, had experienced 7 years of decline when Cheryl took the helm. She decided to do something unorthodox, something a little different. She was going to use servant leadership to make the company better. She hosted 7 listening tours in 7 different cities, going to each city and just listening to the employees and the owners. You see, for Cheryl, everybody at Popeyes was important. She would take this feedback she would get, and she would rebrand the business to Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen. And she would grow the business for 10 years straight, taking the stock price from $14 to $79. You see, servant leadership is real, it's tangible, it's quantifiable. Imagine what we could do if we used Cheryl's model and had the courage to do what she did and do it in different areas around the world. So I have a question for you all as leaders. What if today was your last day? How much of your life would you have dedicated to service? Would you have any regrets? Would you have served your family and your spouse, your community, your church, your country? If today was your last day, what type of legacy would you leave? Would it be a legacy of wealth, status, accomplishment? Or would it be a legacy of of service and love for others. See, I sat in a doctor's office just weeks ago, looking up at a screen, and the doctor would put his hand on my shoulder and say, "Son, you're very lucky to be alive. What you had could have easily killed you." That afternoon, I would look at the blood clots in my lungs that had gone through my heart. And I would sit with my little 4-year-old daughter, Annabelle, in my lap, holding her hand in mine, and she would say, "Daddy, are you going to be okay?" I didn't know whether I'd be okay, but I knew one thing for sure, that all I cared about in that moment was, had I served her? Had I served my wife? Had I served my family, my community? What type of example had I set for this sweet little girl? And would she grow up to have the courage to serve in her heart, like my grandfather had in his? How can you be a servant leader in your own life? Can you serve with your family together in the community, in your church? Can you serve your country, the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, Teach for America, the military, or just by getting out the vote? Can you have a culture in your business to where service and loving others is just as important as profit and production? Or track happiness in your company and seek to improve it? Can you inspire and guide other servant leaders so they can have impacts on lives and create a difference? I urge you today to set yourself aside, to seek to serve others. And I promise you that your service will be a blessing. It is my greatest hope that you will serve, because service brings blessing and selfishness creates suffering. So be the change you want to see in the world, and be that change today. Today could be your last day. Don't wait until tomorrow. I almost found this out the hard way. Commit today. Transform a life. Find something worth dying for and live for it. And reach deep inside your heart and find the courage to serve. Thank you.